Hi there. Welcome to the second video of the Association of British Botanical Artists. We're looking at botany, beginners and botanical art. Last time we looked at really simple flowers. We looked at a geranium, and this time we're going to look at something slightly more complicated. We're going to look at a daisy. We're going to look at the oxeye daisy. This is an example of the Asteraceae or Compositeae. It's a compound flower, which is actually this top bit here is made up of a lot of little flowers stuck onto what is like a pincushion. So if you can imagine them all like little pins. So we're going to actually cut down and have a look at it. But before we start that, let's have a look at the plant as a whole. So let's go for an overhead look. And this is a plant I dug up from my gravel drive. I'm going to start at the bottom. This is a stem that travels under the ground and it's called a rhizome. It has roots that come off it, which grow down into the ground, as you can see. And the stem, this is the flower stem. So in the spring, the flower stem shoots up and you lose what overwintered. And what overwintered on the rhizome were these rosettes of leaves. Now these are here because I actually cut the flower off this one quite a while ago, so it's going into its winter mode. So this flower stem will die. But let's look up the flower stem and see how that goes before we start tackling the flower. So this is a stem I took off a flower earlier. You can see that this is actually ridged. It's not round. It's got lovely red lines down the ridges. These leaves are attached directly onto the stem and actually wrap around them a little bit at the bottom. They're quite dentate, and if we go back down here, you'll see they're different to these little leaves, which are like little spoons with very long stems or petioles. Okay? It's very important when you're painting a flower to know how these bits all fit together and where the flower comes in relation to that. This bit here is called the internode, the bit between the nodes. And the nodes are just where leaves or other stems come off. So they're a section of the plant where something happens. So let's get those out of the way and bring in a flower part. Okay, so I've cleared away all the vegetative parts of the flower, and now we're going to look at the flower head, which is at the end of the stem. We have terminal flower head, terminal because it's at the top, it's at the end, like the terminus on a railway station, and this is the flower stem a little bit lower down. So let's start to look at the top. I'll bring it down here so it's central in your view. Here we go. So the flower head has a lovely mound of yellow disc florets, and if you can see just in the middle, I'm beginning to see the little mound of stigmas sticking up. They're the female parts of the flower that receive the pollen. Oh look, there's a little thrip climbing out through here. They do a lot of the pollinating. Bees like it, but so do these little thrips and pollen beetles. Okay. Underneath the ray florets, those beautiful white florets, Leucanthemum, the name is chosen for the Greek for white. And underneath you can see that there's a really tough little mound of bracts. This is called the involucre, and that holds the receptacle. Okay, this is the terminal flower, but if we go a bit further down the stem, and it was so long I had to cut it, you'll see that at one of these nodes you've got a flower coming out of the axil. An axil is somewhere where something joins to something else. And inside this leaf there would have been a bud, and that bud has developed into a flower. Okay, I'll remove these parts and we're going to move on to an image I took yesterday of the flower we're going to dissect. We'll start with this one from above, and you can see here the flower in more detail. you can see all the little tiny flowers on the top, little tiny, and they're called florets, little flowers, florets. So we've got florets that have these long white rays, and they're called ray florets. And then in the center we have all these little tiny yellow rays. They're arranged in a spiral pattern out from the center, and I'll be able to show you that a little bit later on when we're doing close-up, but not at this moment. We're going to dissect this so that we can see exactly what's happening in this top bit, and this whole bit here with the bracts, the florets, is called a capitulum. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a scalpel and we're going to cut this flower in half across. Flower head. I shouldn't say flower, it's incorrect. So we can cut it in any direction because it is symmetrical. Whoops, as long as you go through the middle. Okay, so let's put this to one side and let's go for a close-up view and choose our flower. Here we go. We're going to cut directly through the flower, as I showed you last time, right down through the middle and down through the stem. So I'm going to turn it on its face and I'm going to remove a bit of the stem. It just makes it easier. You can see the stem is hollow, and we'll see it better when it's open. I'm going to cut down through the stem. Oh, it's quite hard. Push. There we go. Now we have two equal halves. And you can see, there we go, there's one. And here's the second one. And there's lots of little thrips jumping all over this. You can see all the pollen in the middle where I've just squashed it down. Okay, so we're going to choose this one and we're going to take that one out of the way. And we'll get rid of some of these little bits around here. There we go. And just get rid of the last one. Okay, when I come to dissecting a flower, I want to start in the center and I want to work out, because I want to see what happens from the center to the outside of the plant. We can see that these disc florets get smaller and smaller, and there's actually a dip in the center. So when we're drawing our little pin cushion, we need to notice that these florets here get longer, and these are the ones that have the little stigmas sticking out the top. And then the immature plants, there's a little florets, you've got an indentation. So let's start by taking out the first one. Okay, so I need to hold the flower still, and we want to get the whole floret, including the ovary at the bottom, out. And then we want to lay it, that one's actually been cut a little bit. I want to lay it here. And we want to work out from the middle. So we're going to go to this one next. I think the ones after it are going to fall off. There we go. Oops. Here we go. There we go. And then we're going to come out a bit further, and now we'll see these ones. You can see the flower is starting to get longer and the ovary at the bottom a bit larger. And now we can see on the next one that the petals are starting to look more formed. And on the next one we can see, oops, actually those two are a bit damaged. Let's go for one a bit further in on the same spiral section. There we go, that one. You can see here that the petals are starting to open. It's probably quite tricky to see on this, but it's maybe a good idea to see it actually being taken apart. See, the ovary is quite large. As we go up to the next one, I don't know if in this section we've got one with stigmas sticking out. So what I'll do is I'll do a naughty and I'll sneak back and find one with stigmas because we missed that bit. There we go, and that was in about here. You'd obviously take more time. On this one we can see the flower parts are open, and we can see the stigmas sticking out the top. They're the female parts of the flower. As we go out, the ovary starts to develop more, so we start to get the ovary turning into the seed, and the seeds on these are quite dark, and I'll show you that on one I produced earlier. There we go. This is the ray floret, and you can see the ray floret with the flower parts at the bottom, and I'll pop it about there so you can see it properly. And then the next bit we would take off are the bracts on the bottom. Keep that there. One of them I actually cut off, so I'm going to cheat a little bit. This is one from near the centre, and you see it's got a slightly rounded top, and you can see on here the way that these overlap like little tiles on the roof, but I've got one of those to show you later. So you start by taking off these bracts from the bottom and working up. I keep damaging them because it's quite hard to get them off, so you just have to be patient. And you can see that, let me show you on here, that they're actually quite pointy at the bottom but come to much more rounded points at the top. Okay, let's move on and show you the dissection as a photograph. Let's clear these out of the way and show you the photograph of one I did earlier. This is a section through that we produced yesterday, and it's got the stem, and you can see it's hollow. You see the receptacle here with all its sort of tissue, and it's quite hard. And then on top of that there's all these little florets all lined up like little pins on a pincushion. And here we've got the ray floret, and it comes down and it's got its ovary at the bottom, and then the flower part here. And then next to it we've got a disc floret, again with an ovary, and the flower parts here. On some of these, here for example, you can see the little petals that make up the tube. The petals here are 5 and in a tube. The stamens inside wrap round inside the tube, and then 2 little stigmas come out the top. Now what you need perhaps to think about is that there are no stigmas visible here. These flowers have already given out their pollen and collected pollen and are beginning to develop their seed. Up here though you've got the stigmas, so when you're painting you have to be really careful how you picture this, because these are discrete little circles, but it gets a little bit fuzzier as you come out, as you're getting the little already flowered ones. So think of these as little individual flowers. Right, let's move over now to the dissection I did yesterday. And I took this image using my camera, and I didn't use the microscope function. I just used my ordinary camera up an iPhone. And let's start again from the middle, because I was able to lay them out, not without much cussing, I tell you. Here's a little one on the inside which is really immature, and then as we come out the flower starts to develop. On top of this is the ovary. The flower is developing, the petals are starting to come out. On this one the petals have opened and you can see the stigmas. Here you can see the anthers starting to protrude, and then the stigma comes out at the top on this one. And these are in various stages of getting ready to flower, of finishing flowering. And we've come out here now to the ray floret. So the most mature seeds are on the outside, although they haven't matured as much yet. And these are the bracts from underneath, which I'll show you in a moment when I show you the spirals and I show you the receptacle in more detail. But before we do that, I just want to show you what the seeds look like when they develop. These seeds have lovely little stripes. They're very pretty, and they seed prolifically, and they grow anywhere, all over the drive. I've pulled a lot out this year. Okay, so let's go to close-up now again and have a look at the spiral arrangement in a fairly immature flower. And you can see here the lovely little spirals. Actually use my pointer because that's much finer. Here we go. You can see here the little spiral arrangement of all the flower parts going down into the middle. So they're very short there, and then they gradually grow. But when they're finished, you get this lovely mound. So you have to be aware of these changes in shape when you're painting. That's kind of important. And at the moment, I've got a little lovely circle of stigmas and anthers, and the pollen's on the outside. I want to also show you what the receptacle looks like. I took all of the florets off the flower head, except for a few. I took all the ray florets off and left on a few disc florets. And here's the receptacle in the middle. This is the pincushion bit here. I left on the involucre bracts, the bracts that are round, and we'll show you that because then we'll talk about how they're arranged. And you can see here the little pile of disc florets that make up the rest of the flower head. Now let's turn this over because this gives you an idea of how these all fit together. Here we've got all our little bracts that alternate like little tiles on the roof. That's called imbrication, and they're really tightly arranged at the bottom. Actually, to take those off the flower, I didn't dissect them just now because it's actually quite hard and it needs a bit of patience. They're actually quite tough and need a bit of pulling. You can see that they've got these lovely dark lines around the edge, and as you get out, see, they're nice and pointed, but these ones here, these last ones, are a bit more translucent and actually are more rounded. All little things you need, or it'd be useful to look at. Okay, let's have a look at how I used that dissection in an image that I did. This is a dissection just like the one we did before, cross sections through the receptacle of the whole capitulum. You can see here all the bract scales around the outside. This paper daisy, all these bracts dry, and that's why it's called a paper daisy. This is Xerochrysum bracteatum. It's the Australian paper daisy. These are the ovaries, as we saw before, and you can see they get more and more immature as you go towards the center. These will grow once they've been fertilized. You can see here the anthers, the male parts of the flower. In our oxeye daisy, they're tucked down inside the petal tube, but they come a little bit further up when the pollen's released, and then the stigmas come out and open through them. You'll see the stigmas better on the ones that I dissected, but you can see one here. This was a kind of little broken bit. So I laid out the florets in a semicircle this time. Instead of doing them in lines, I wanted to make it look a little bit more decorative. I started here and I kind of lined them up with the place they were on the flower. So you can see how the bracts change as they go towards the center of the flower head. And you can see they get quite long and skinny in the middle. And then these are the more mature fruits. And you can see here that this part is starting to die already. But unlike ours, this has got a very, the sepals, which go around the outside of the petals, are more like a feather. They're all feathery, you can see them here. See the anther up here, that will give out pollen. And they're more feathery, and they're attached, as all the parts are, to the ovary. Now the ovary It's underneath all the flower parts, which make it an inferior ovary. And that's true of our oxeye daisy. You can see on this one, you can see the petal tube, you can see the petals, and you can see the stigma starting to come out of the top. And you can see it clearly here. You can see how long these hairs called pappus are getting. And then you can see here that they're really quite far open with the anther. And these fly around by wind. Wind dispersed, that's the word I'm looking for. Okay, let's see how I use this in a final image. So this was an image that I did for the Sydney Florilegium, Royal Botanic Garden, Sydney, the Banks and Solander exhibition, to celebrate the first European botanist to go up the east coast of Australia. Get my west and east right. So this is the whole plant. This is about 40 centimetres high. And I included the dissection here. And the semicircle was to make it look a little less rigid and scientific. Now, this is life size. So the 40 centimetres was the life size of the plant I painted. I wanted to include these, but if I'd done them life size, they'd obviously be too small. So these are magnified. This is magnified by 1.5 times. So next to it here, it's got times 1.5. These were magnified twice life size. I did that by drawing through a really strong lens with a strong light. And these are times 2. They're double life size. That has to be indicated on the image in a botanical illustration. You can see here too, you can see the more mature flowers here. You can see the dip in the middle. You can see those florets that haven't opened. And you can see the underside. They're not quite the same. They're not quite, you can see they're a bit tighter here. But you can see here clearly the bracts on the outside. Okay, I think that probably covers what we want to cover for the Compositeae. It's a quick run through. Obviously it isn't completely comprehensive, but I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed this second episode of Beginner Botany and Botanical Art, and I hope it'll inspire you to go and cut up some flowers and have a look, but don't cut up those that there aren't many of. Okay, well, it's been lovely to spare time with you. Thank you. And I'll say goodbye. Stay safe, stay well.